The first day I decided to study the Laotian language, I got on my bicycle with a blank notebook and I rode downtown to a laundry shop that had what was, from my perspective, a list of vocabulary written out in chalk for various types of clothes and how much it would cost to wash them there. So you can imagine the vocabulary is quite specific. Scarf, shawl, women's lower undergarments, women's upper undergarments, blue jeans, dress pants. They charged a slightly different price for each and every conceivable article of clothing, from modern Western office wear to traditional Laotian wedding gowns and Buddhist monks' robes. It was quite a vocabulary list. And what did I do? I wrote down every single one and I went home and memorized them. This was not the whole of my plan. On the same bicycle, I actually went into different laundry shops and made a point of talking through with the person behind the desk what laundry I was going to have done and how much it would cost. It would be quite possible, especially if you're a white Western looking foreigner, to just go and with a sort of grunt say, laundry, do laundry. But no. I was pushing myself to learn the language. So you try to speak in long, complex, polite sentences, which, if you don't know Laotian, they find that both incomprehensible and hilarious, because they walk into a shop and they say one syllable, 2 syllables, 3 syllables maximum, communicates everything they need to say, and then they get out. And here I am trying to speak in a whole paragraph. Yes, if it's not too much to ask, I'm sorry to bother you. I was hoping to get some laundry done. Now, the thing is, I have 3 of these pairs of pants, and I wouldn't exactly call them blue jeans, and I also wouldn't call them dress pants. There's something in between. So how much is it going to cost for you? It's untranslatably hilarious for a 6'3" tall, bald-shaven white man to walk into your shop in Laos and try to speak to you this way. Because in their own language, in their own idiom, someone will walk in and say, pants. that really is the way people who speak the language fluently communicate. And they get the tone just right, by the way. They get the vowel sound, the consonant sound right in a way that I can't. I remember going around and trying to get a watch fixed. But I think I was trying to get a replacement strap for a watch. So not quite the same thing. And again, I walked in with this long paragraph. And by contrast, when I went in with my girlfriend, the only Asian girlfriend I've ever had, by the way, who spoke the language completely fluently, when she walked in, she said 1 word, 1 syllable. So that's what Lao is like. Now, we live in a culture that massively overdiagnoses autism, what's now called autistic spectrum disorder, that groups together all kinds of people who have unrelated medical and psychological problems and brands them with the term autism, puts them in the category of autistic one way or another. In case you don't know, just recently, the concept of Asperger's has been removed from this complex equation. And they do so on the basis of behavior. If I were trying to get myself diagnosed with autism, I could probably tell you the anecdote I just told you in a slightly more autistic way, and it could be used as evidence against me as a sort of stereotypical autistic behavior. Another one of my language learning hacks, language learning tips that a lot of you might know is to begin by going to the index at the back of your language textbook, whatever it is, and to memorize all of the vocabulary that appears in the textbook. And then when you do the lessons, language practice in the textbook, you're not struggling just with the vocabulary. Then you think more about the grammar or the sentence structure. You're thinking about other things. You're practicing other language. Yes, well, under consideration here for diagnosis, we have Mr. Aizul Mazard, whose idea of how to learn Laotian is to to write out this vocabulary list and memorize it, and to start at the back of the book, and this repetitious rote memorization. In as much as autism is merely a behavioral stereotype, it has no scientific reality, and it's not falsifiable. I was interested to see recently that there is no scientific definition of what an autistic voice sounds like, of what an autistic pattern of speech sounds like. And it's very striking to me for a number of reasons. Pretty much every parent who has an autistic child is confident that their own child is a solid example of what autistic speech patterns are like, right? The way in which their own child's manner of speaking is different from other children or themselves or what they imagine is normal. And then they go around and meet other parents of autistic children. You can imagine these people have picnics and organizations. There are all kinds of scenarios. They're waiting to see the therapist, whatever it is. And they say, oh, isn't that funny? My son, Tom, he does that same thing the same way. Oh, it's very easy to have a self-affirming hypothesis, right, of what autistic language problems are, autistic patterns of speech, autistic behaviors are. But if you actually try to set it up, try to engage in rigorous scientific research, if you actually formalize the criteria and try to create a diagnostic tool, right? Because wouldn't it be great if there were a falsifiable, objectively real definition for autism where you could record someone's voice, and then whether a human being is going through this checklist or a computerized process, and you can say, this is autism, this isn't. That there were. It's certainly preferable to analyzing facial features, right? Nobody wants to go back to the bad old days of physiognomy, defining a disease. Okay, well, it turns out this is a behavioral stereotype with no objectively real scientific basis whatsoever. The first time this struck me was actually when I was putting together a video, which was clips of mass murderers who had autism. And one of them especially, who really recorded himself speaking into a camera, I think immediately before he went out and killed people, but he made a sort of manifesto on videotape. What was so striking to me was that in his speech, in his performance, he did not seem autistic at all. And in that guy's case, there was tremendous evidence that he was indeed autistic. And in my opinion, not just slightly autistic. It wasn't a borderline case or something. And there was evidence from his school teachers, from psychotherapists, from experts. Psychotherapists of some kind. There were all these kind of professionals with formal university training relevant to this. And then there were also complaints from other people in his life who were trying to cope with him before he went crazy and killed people. But it was very striking. It was very haunting to me. So you're telling me that someone who has all this hard evidence, having been through the diagnostic criteria, it's a proven fact this person has autism, that they can sit on camera and give this monologue and, from my perspective, seem normal, especially in terms of the use of language. Now, more and more YouTubers who really are autistic now upload monologues to this same website. And when you contrast them, this may also seem very striking to you. They don't speak with one voice. They don't have one set of recognizable verbal tics. But maybe your attitude instead will be, just like the parent of an autistic child I described before, maybe you will only notice the similarities, right? You won't notice the differences. So we're living through a period of time when, on the one hand, nobody wants to be diagnosed as retarded. Nobody wants to be diagnosed with a mental disability, but especially not with an incurable mental disability. They don't want a mental disability they don't want to be diagnosed with themselves or their son or daughter. They don't want to be diagnosed with something that will exclude them from the education system, that will disadvantage them forever in terms of education and employment. And the attitude toward autism has become one of enablement, empowerment. This is not insuperable. One of the most commonly said things on the internet is that autism in no way impairs intelligence. Unlike, of course, I've heard this from autistic people, and I've heard it from an amazing array of people on the internet. The dogmatic insistence that a diagnosis of autism has nothing to do with your intelligence. That you can be highly intelligent and nevertheless be autistic. And then how exactly they define autism. There's tremendous variety in this. I heard an autistic woman stating her conclusion after many years of research that she believes autism is entirely a symptom of capitalism. That if it weren't for the capitalist system trying to exploit us and trying to keep us down, that autism wouldn't exist at all. And this is not, she is not trolling. She is dead serious. This is her conclusion. And thus that her own symptoms, her own disease, are a response to the oppression she endures in a capitalist society. And yet, of course, unintentionally, there's a sense in which her thesis overlaps with mine. Because when I'm saying that it is our particular 21st century capitalist society that results in the massive overdiagnosis of autism, all kinds of people are being diagnosed as autistic who could be diagnosed as something else, who could be diagnosed as learning disabled, who could be diagnosed as mentally retarded, could be diagnosed as, I don't know, eccentric. Right? A whole range of people are being diagnosed with autism, frankly, for what could be called sort of capitalist reasons in response to the pressures capitalist society and our capitalist education system puts on. Certain kind of strange sympathy with her hypothesis, no matter how absurd it may be. And on the other hand, I'm very aware of the extent to which our capitalist society encourages us inculcates into us what could be bluntly called autistic patterns of behavior. Being the sort of character who will sit and repetitiously study and memorize something again and again and again until they can get an A+ on the test, on the exam, that certainly is encouraged, isn't it? Now, some people would fault the example I already gave you of how I first started learning Laotian by saying, no, to learn a language, you should be in a warm, encouraging social environment. Learning a language, you should go out and drink beer at the pub and watch sports with your friends. And there are all kinds of different approaches to this. There's sort of a theater therapy approach that's all about, kind of theatricality and acting out scenes together. There are certainly people who would say the best way to learn a language is through music and so on. There are all kinds of there are certainly people who say watching television and so on, right? But you have an education system, you have an economic system. Shall we say we take a sort of factory-based approach to learning? Right? We're interested in what can be accomplished in the minimum amount of time with the minimum amount of labor, not the minimum amount of labor by the student, the minimum amount of labor by the teacher, minimum cost to the institution, which is starting to look a lot like students sitting alone with their cell phone playing a video game to learn a language, getting it right. Like Duolingo is infesting the high school education system, university education, so on. The quality of classroom instruction you get may be much worse than Duolingo on your phone, wherever you are studying language, right? So interested in the maximum outcome for the minimum amount of effort. We're only interested in the aspects of language that can fit onto a multiple choice test, multiple choice exam. A lot of aspects of language learning that are not on there. We're interested in what you can do sitting alone at a desk, rocking back and forth, frankly, maybe with your headphones on. We are normalizing and reinforcing autistic patterns of behavior, and we're rewarding autistic patterns of behavior. And at the opposite extreme, the gregarious, self-confident, sociable character type is condemned as a narcissist, as a psychopath, right? If you're not happy to sit there and shut up and do what the teacher says and memorize and repeat again and again and then write your exam and get your B-, then you must be some kind of narcissist. You must be some kind of egomaniac. You must be some kind of sociopath. Anyone who challenges the system is, of course, but even simply people who are charismatic are seen that way. Why can't you be a quiet, conformist who lacks the confidence to even look your teacher straight in the eyes. You know, wouldn't it be easier for the whole educational system if everyone were this kind of autist, frankly? Now, I like to talk about people as examples that I know really well. And that is why I mention my father and my mother so often. It's why I mention myself and my girlfriend, Melissa, so often. I don't like to use examples of people I only knew for a few months at one stage of my life. So I'm sorry if it bores you to hear yet another anecdote about my father. My father had 9 children. Some of them he kind of barely met, barely had any contact with in his whole life. And one of his daughters, whom he only met and spoke to face once. So he met her once, and she had already finished her PhD. So I forget what age she was. But she was a fully grown adult woman, middle-aged woman. So when he met her, they met and had one conversation once, and she walked away from that conversation completely convinced that my father had autism. And she described to me the conversation that they had. Now, there was a lot wrong with my father. Quite a few different diagnoses could be applied to my father. There was a lot wrong with that guy. And I would definitely say he is someone who struggled with a learning disability. I've met only a couple people like this. I've met a couple people with the learning disability where you can't read well. Dyslexia. I've met a couple people who had dyslexia and kind of compensated or overcompensated in some ways. So that's, by the way, it's not just one pattern. Different people respond to that in different ways. But I knew one guy who had dyslexia and he got a PhD in English literature, and he talked to me about that, like in depth, you know. And earlier in his life, he had gone into the military service, and he was very aware of. He was kind of really working hard to conceal his dyslexia while he was in the U.S. military. It was an interesting story. And then he developed and eventually got a PhD in English literature. Anyway, interesting guy, but he still was carrying with him, a very real disability that he had to compensate for, and he came up with his own sort of toolkit for how to compensate. Anyway, yeah, I would kind of interpret my father instead as somebody who was compensating for some other learning disability, frankly. But looking back on my father's life, he's now deceased. It certainly is easy to cherry pick. It certainly is easy to take out little examples here and there of autistic behavior. But again, what's striking to me is this. The autistic behaviors he had were precisely the behaviors that were inculcated into him by the school system. They were the behaviors that he learned, that were rewarded and that he was punished for not exhibiting. They weren't, so to speak, his natural emotional range, performative range, so on and so forth. Now, in as much as autism is nothing but a stereotype, it's nothing but a perceived set of behaviors, and it isn't an underlying medical condition. To that extent, can't we ask the question, and shouldn't we ask the question, is this job making me seem autistic? If you have a certain kind of repetitious, denigrating job, isn't this course of study, this education, making me seem autistic? Isn't this inculcating into me a set of behaviors that any other reasonable person would perceive as autistic, even if I myself don't, on some medical level, have autism? How old were you when you started playing video games? What are the behaviors? What are the attitudes that video game addiction, inculcates into us? You might say you weren't an addict. Do you remember rushing home from school as quickly as possible to play video games the minute you got home? Do you remember rushing over to your video game console or to your computer so you could start playing video games immediately as soon as your parents finished eating dinner, as soon as they allowed you to leave the dinner table? Can you remember refusing to come to the dinner table for as long as possible? No, Mom, just another minute. Can you remember staying up as late at night as you could to play video games? Can you remember lying to your parents? I didn't do this specific one, but many people did. Pretending to have gone to sleep, and your parents go to sleep, and then you get up and play video games. If you had a portable video game system as a kid, that one's even more common. Secretly playing video games. Oh, so are you so sure you weren't a video game addict at some point in your childhood? At some point in your development? Now, look. What's the course of education that would counteract these autistic tendencies? This is what's fascinating about language education and the polyglot subculture in particular. A lot of autistic people are self-diagnosing to begin with. They may have never been formally diagnosed on them. They perceive these behaviors in themselves. They know they're undesirable. They may be especially aware that it's undesirable to the opposite sex or the same sex, whatever kind of sex they're after. And then they are trying to compensate by putting themselves into the socially immediate and intimate process of learning a foreign language. And they may be putting themselves into it again and again and again. Now, people with autism also do theater therapy. They take improv classes. Ooh, they take classes on stand-up comedy. If you enroll in classes, so-called improv is a form of comedy, classes on stand-up comedy. One of the great miseries is that you're not surrounded by aspiring actors or writers, for that matter. You are very often surrounded by people who've been diagnosed with one mental disability or another, and who, as I say, they are trying to compensate. They're trying to develop a more self-confident manner of speaking, a more personable manner of speaking. They're trying to work on those people skills, right? They may even tell you specifically they want to work on dissimulating compassion, because there is this utterly unscientific stereotype that what differentiates autists from the rest of the population is the inability to experience compassion. Very commonly said. Again, not absolutely zero scientific reality, just the social stereotype we're all living with. Good luck coming up with a scientifically valid definition of compassion. Topic for another video, and it's a video I've already made, believe it or not. It's a chapter of my book too. What is compassion? Yes. But anyway, if you don't have a scientifically valid definition of compassion, you cannot possibly define autism as a scientifically valid disease of people lacking this thing you can't even define. It's really ridiculous. So people throw themselves into learning a new language. They throw themselves into engaging with a foreign culture. And they throw themselves into competing with other people on the internet in this strange sport of language learning, of being a polyglot. And they don't do this in a state of rebellion against the educational system. They certainly don't do it in a state of rebellion against the capitalist system, right? They do it in an ever more perfect conformity to those expectations. They're studying for the exam with those exam-based methods. And again, to be self-critical, you can look at the extent to which the methods I recommend for language learning are not so different, because my approach does involve memorization of vocabulary, for example. And I'm very harshly critical of some more kind of emotional approaches to language learning that seem to me to be coddling you and encouraging you and making you feel good about yourself and building up your self-esteem, but you're not actually learning the language. So, that some of this criticism applies to me, as we'll come back to, I think, in the conclusion of this video. My point is not to suggest to you that I am pure. On the contrary, I think for all of us here, when you look back on your life and you think, what were the experiences, what were the jobs, what were the hobbies, what were the activities I did that made me more autistic? I actually think that's a question very much worth asking. Again, for a lot of you, the answer is going to be period of video game addiction you had or something like that. Maybe you used to play RuneScape, an online video game, and you would simultaneously have some kind of, telephone connection to other players, internet audio, and would be getting angry and screaming at the other players. And you look back at that now and you think, boy, the playing of the video game, the frustration with not getting satisfaction the minute you press the button, and then screaming at other people and having these kind of meltdowns, having this kind of extreme emotional reaction. Looking back at it now, what were the effects of my behavior? How did that maybe change my behavior with my girlfriend 5 years later or something? How did that form my sense of what's normal for adult life? What's normal, what's acceptable, or just how I react in those situations? I think all of us can look back on these things. Well, guess what? I taught myself a series of languages that are incredibly difficult to learn with incredibly hard work. And I am self-critical in precisely this way. I don't think the study of these languages made me a better person. I think in many ways the study of these languages made me a worse person. But, look at theater therapy. Look at people taking a course on stand-up comedy, course on improv, course on learning to act, learning to do what I'm doing just right now. And what there's Toastmasters. There are these different classes you can take for how to go speak. For one thing, it's not the cure for autism. But for another thing, I'm pretty sure all of those experiences, they really only make people feel more self-confident in their own autistic behaviors. I think it ends up just enabling stereotypically autistic behaviors, giving you a sense of self-righteousness, certainty, in those same behaviors. Now, you learn to make eye contact. To be fair, it's not all bad. And for me also working as a teacher, there are people who in university can't make eye contact. That they're not all autistic. It's a stage they haven't developed past. There are people who can't hold a normal conversation for all kinds of different reasons. Not only autism. Okay. So when you look at language learning, when you look at the commitment to learn just one language and to deal with just one cultural divide, cultural gap, or what have you, I've warned you before to think about the price, think about the opportunity cost, think about what you could be doing with your life. I've warned you to think about the brain damage, so to speak. This is part of your mind you never get back again to use for some other purpose, And in many different videos under many different headings, I've asked you to think about the person you want to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and which way this is leading you, right? And I've told you to think about the outcomes too. I want you to imagine a society, an education system, and an economy that really discouraged autistic behaviors, that really punished them. Can you imagine how the French language would be taught in school, how the Spanish language would be taught in school, how any mainstream classroom would teach a language to children if from day one the whole education system were designed to avoid inculcating into you stereotypically autistic behaviors? And how would your performance be evaluated? And how would you be hired for a job? Right? I mean, obviously, people with medically real autism, people with any kind of mental disability, learning disability that gets diagnosed as autism, rightly or wrongly, all of those people naturally feel disadvantaged in our society. So they're very quick to say, oh, well, our whole society is set up to reward you normies, to reward people who have kind of normal emotional range. What do they say? They don't say psychologically normal. They say, right. So neurodivergent. And then what's the opposite of neurodivergent? Neurotypical. That's the term. Thanks, Ben. They say, oh, well, the whole society is this kind of conspiracy only to reward neurotypical people and neurotypical people. No, it's not. When I was at Cambridge University, England, and I was not a student, I was married to a student. I was at Cambridge University and I applied for a job. And the job description suggested I would be going to university lectures and taking notes for a blind person. I thought, wow, that sounds great. And it also said you might have to, bring the blind person in a wheelchair. Not that they can't walk, but when you're blind, getting in and out of a crowded room, you might have to do some other things to help the blind person out with their dealing. But I thought, great, I can get paid to attend a bunch of university level lectures at Cambridge University, one of the greatest universities, for free. And all I got to do is take notes and to some extent be chummy, be friendly with a blind person. It sounds like a dream job. Sign me up. That's what it said on paper. I show up for the job interview and talk to the woman. And what she says is, well, the vast majority of the people our department tries to help. Number one, the problem is they don't want to admit that they're disabled. So typically it'll be someone who is severely autistic, quite autistic, not mildly autistic. And they're really good at doing the rote memorization, the repetitious studying for exams and tests. So they've gotten very, very high grades on those exams and tests. But as soon as they come here and start living in a residency, they don't have any of the normal behaviors you need to survive. They can't cook for themselves. They can't clean for themselves. She gave the example of showing up in somebody's apartment and there weren't just piles of dirty laundry on the floor. The guy just kept buying more clothes and wearing them and taking them and never doing laundry. When the guy's toilet got clogged, he didn't go to someone else for help. Like, he can't do anything to care. This is someone who's really very significantly mentally disabled, and he's sitting in the corner. And the hardest part of the process is convincing this guy to sign a form admitting that he's mentally disabled and needs help so that they can justify their budget and provide help for this guy. And she said the people in their department, they do his laundry. It's the most ridiculous thing. This guy has a scholarship to be at Cambridge University, England. And there you are doing his laundry. I didn't get the job, by the way. My whole life would be different if really, really think about what a different. So she talked this through, that really what they were dealing with was people with so-called high-functioning autism. What does high-functioning mean? It means you can get a high grade on the test, right? It might be that everything else is wrong with you, but you can still get a high grade on the test. I have been through the intelligence tests to enter the Canadian Army. An autistic person could do very well on those tests. Do you think they're screening out autistic people? Because I don't. I've written the test. Okay, guys. I studied for and I've written the test. I didn't study much, but you could put in hours and hours and lots of repetition. You can get very far in life with autism because, in fact, our whole society is set up in a way that enables autistic behavior, normalizes autistic behavior, and even holds up as a positive example for emulation that neurotypical people should look up to and celebrate autistic behavior. Is Elon Musk looked down upon in our society for his autism, for his autistic behavior? Would you even say that the public attitude towards Elon Musk shifted or became more negative when he revealed that he is formally diagnosed with autism, that he is an autistic person? The depiction of autistic people on television and in film, so on and so forth. I'll take a moment to read comments in the audience. Melissa, if you feel comfortable, if you have any questions or comments, it's got to be, I deal with a lot of edgy, disturbing subjects on this channel. I admit, I understand there are 37 people in the audience right now. A lot of you have not hit thumbs up. I understand you don't want to give thumbs up to this video and have the record of that thumbs up, haunt you for the rest of your life. Decades from now, you're going to be asked, why did you give thumbs up to this video? I've heard a lot of people talk about the possibility, actually, of, even though it's impossible, um, of the possibility of Elon Musk becoming president of the United States. He's not born in the United States of America, therefore it's impossible. Just to mention, you have to be born on American soil to be elected president of the United States. I've never once heard anyone say that Elon Musk is not suitable to be president of the United States because of his autism. Hmm. A few different people writing in about their own experience being diagnosed with autism or being diagnosed as without autism. Mm-mm-mm. Great question. Is this an alpha male versus beta male talk? Hmm. So I am reading each and every one of your comments at this moment, guys, if you're wondering what the silence is. Right. So James mentions that he's had many people tell him that he has autistic behaviors, even though he is not on the spectrum. Well, okay, point one, I've already said it. We're living through a time when autism is a very, very broad um, behavioral stereotype. I think it can be compared to being a psychopath. What is being a psychopath? It's not a scientifically valid concept. It never has been, by the way. Now, by contrast, a totally unscientific concept that was popular for many years and is now out of fashion: multiple personality disorder. Multiple personality disorder doesn't exist. It never has existed, by the way. Um, okay, people will not so lightly accuse you of having multiple personality disorder. But yes, we're living through a time when it's very easy for someone to have autism ascribed to them over some quite trivial behaviors. Now, the anecdote about my father, so my father was meeting his own biological daughter for the first time, and it turned out to be the last time, and he's meeting her as a middle aged woman. She described to me his behavior and what he'd said and so on. And I can tell you right now, that was how my father acted when he was nervous. And he was obviously just extremely nervous and trying to conceal it and trying to be kind of the life of the party. Like her description, and I understand what he was actually doing was really awkward and off putting and seemed autistic. Like, I get that. But, I'm listening to the story and like I can imagine him doing his stuff. It's like, oh God, that's really him just kind of being a dork. It's just him kind of being a nerd. And I get it. That's the only time you met your own biological father. Right? This is your diagnosis on that basis. But maybe it would be more challenging for you to have a little bit of sympathy, using sympathy as an analytical tool, and see what an extraordinarily stressful situation it is for him. Right? Like, he's stepping in that situation. He's never met you before. He's never met you before because your mother hated him so intensely that she prevented him from ever seeing you. Blah blah blah. You can kind of fill in the blanks there. I I am not saying my father is a good guy or a nice guy. He was a terrible human being, but there are explanations for that behavior. Other than autism. Now, very serious social science research has been done on whether or not one human being can discern lying, dishonesty in another. And long story short, the answer is no. And the most, you know, grave warning that comes out of that research is people like doctors, people like judges, people like police officers, they are less able to discern who is lying and who is telling the truth, precisely because they think they are able to discern who is lying and who is telling the truth. So, who among us can discern autism? And if autism just is a behavioral stereotype, right? We all have to get honest about what the criteria are, and then the fact that each and every single one of those criteria can be exhibited by a non-autistic person. For example, just because they're nervous. So I did talk about this in one of my books. When a police officer interrogates you, do you look down at the floor? The police officer may interpret that as you being ashamed of yourself, as a sign of guilt rather than innocence. When a police officer interrogates you, do you look him in the eye and respond in a confident, self-assured voice? The police officer may interpret that as a sign of your innocence, but he may interpret that as a sign that you're a psychopath. Police themselves are very much burdened with these, pop psychology things. Oh, you're an egomaniac, you're a narcissist, you're a psychopath. Police diagnose people with narcissism and psychopathy all the time, just casually and in passing. And now the police officer is even more hostile toward you. So, this is indeed, especially in the United States of America, this is why you have to exercise your right to remain silent. No matter what you say, it will be used against you in a court of law. So you have to say absolutely nothing at all. And again, something as harmless as looking down at the floor, looking at your feet, because you're nervous, because you're sad, because you're tired, because you're upset, this can be interpreted as autism. It can be interpreted as dishonesty. Right? No, go. Perfect time. Yeah, you want to? Sure, I want to.
Hey, hello. So my mother is a nurse, and she always encouraged me to go into health fields. And for a while, I was actually taking courses in order to become a speech pathologist. And one of the clientele of people who work as a speech pathologist are children with autism or adults with autism who need help with their speech. So not only have I heard stories from my mother about autistic people, but I also have seen either footage or just interacted with people in real life who have been diagnosed with autism.
Yeah.
And the main thing that I'm thinking as I'm listening to you talk about, this interview that you had,
Yes,
where you might help somebody who has been diagnosed with autism, and they can ostensibly they're intelligent enough to get into Cambridge and Oxford, right? But they can't actually do their own laundry.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just interesting to me that, and this part that you mentioned about him clogging his toilet. And actually, it brought to mind some of these really disturbing stories that my mother told me about either somebody that she knew who had a child with autism having to do with, incontinence or issues with.
Right. Well, I guess maybe sometimes when they're at the hospital too, as a nurse.
Yeah. With.
Yeah.
Pretty gross human bodily functions and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just weird to me that is the same diagnosis that we give to somebody who is.
Right.
We don't know what's going on in Elon Musk's private life. We don't know if he has these issues, but it just.
Do you think Elon Musk can do his own laundry?
Yeah.
Go on.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the main thing that
yeah
is hard for me to just accept that this is the same diagnosis.
Right. Every time I do a video about autism, by the way, I get a bunch of fan mail from my regular viewers letting me know that they're autistic. So a disturbingly high percentage of my fans are diagnosed with autism, in case you hadn't guessed, by the way. Look, if you're fat, pretty much everyone knows the medical advice you're going to get. You can put a different hat on it. You can put different lipstick on it, but you need to be eating fewer calories than you burn. You can burn more calories through exercise. You can eat fewer calories through diet. You can do a combination of both. There were a few different variations. These are all variations. In terms of the laws of physics involved here, there are kind of only two levers, diet and exercise, and there's what you're going to do with either one. One going up and one going down. You're going to get weight loss, muscle gain, et cetera, et cetera. When we are dealing with autism, whether we talk about autism as a behavioral stereotype or autism as a mysterious but presumably real medical condition, or many different medical conditions sharing one diagnosis because of behavioral stereotype. When we get into autism, instead, we are talking about the perfectly paradoxical situation in which seemingly every course of treatment only makes the disease worse, right? If you take someone with autistic behaviors and you, let's say, you put them into the army and you give them a newfound sense of self-confidence in using a gun, in marching, in taking orders, in fulfilling all the requirements that the army does. You have not you have not improved the underlying autism. You know, I have met a few guys who were in and out of the armed forces where I wondered. Again, I can't diagnose these people with autism, but I've met a few guys who've been in and out of the armed service, and there was something wrong with the guys. And you thought, wow, okay, the strong silent type. Okay, this is in a sense. I think if you had an autistic younger brother, if you had an autistic son, a career in the military, it could be one way to go. Like, look, kid, I'm going to put you in an environment where you're told very clearly what to do. There's no ambiguity. You follow the orders, you're okay. You don't, you're in trouble. It's a rules-based system. Everything's out in the open. Everything's explicit. It doesn't rely on, subtle innuendo and nonverbal cues. It doesn't rely on compassion, whatever that means. Maybe you can get out of the army, right? If you take someone with autism and you put them into the theater and you teach them how to memorize a script, right? There's an old joke in the theater. I think it's 100 years old. Maybe it's 200 years old. This joke. It says, oh, these young actors today, they follow this new fad book on how to be a great actor. And it says you have to read the script 15 times before you go to audition. I just don't understand. I don't understand. That's not the way we did it in my day at all. I would never go to an audition without reading the script 100 times. There's a lot of repetition in acting. There's a lot of rote memorization. And of course, there is a dissimulation of mood. You dissimulate compassion. You dissimulate anger. Okay, you can go through that, and you haven't treated autism. You haven't treated the underlying behaviors, right? You've provided a kind of training in how to present yourself as a non-autistic person. And what I see going on in language education, especially the polyglot world, especially the autodidact world here on YouTube, teach yourself a language, is two types of people. One type of people, they are the people who have autistic behaviors. Again, whether it's just a behavioral stereotype, they may have autistic behaviors just because they grew up isolated, playing video games, and in a horrible education system that is based on rote memorization and reinforcing autistic patterns of behavior. They grew up the way they grew up. There may be no medically real component to it, but they have autistic behaviors. They're aware of these autistic behaviors, and they are trying to counteract those autistic behaviors through language learning. So I think you can imagine a young white guy from Nebraska who grew up playing Japanese video games and maybe watching Japanese cartoons and reading Japanese comic books. And he's a bit of a shut-in, and he has seemingly autistic behaviors. And he says, okay, I have to get out there. I have to develop my social skills, my empathy, so on and so forth. And he does it by learning Japanese, studying Japanese, trying to get a Japanese girlfriend. If you have not seen this pattern of behavior before, welcome to the internet. I mean, you've probably seen this hundreds of times before, right? Where language learning, language education is the cure for their autistic behaviors, if not their autism, their learning disability, whatever it may be, as a compensation and coping method. But then there's an even more dangerous problem of people who are in no way autistic, who are in no way struggling with these behaviors, and who are inculcating them, who are even consciously or unconsciously cultivating a pseudo-autistic persona precisely in taking on the mindless, repetitious, asocial, if not antisocial habits of rote memorization, drill, repetition, so on and so forth, right? How do you compare the psychological effects of training to be an actor and, training to be an actor in your own first language and learning a foreign language? They're remarkably similar, aren't they? Right? Memorizing Shakespeare. Oh no, that word isn't pronounced that way. It's pronounced that way in modern English, but in Shakespeare you have to pronounce it this way. Okay, right. Do it again and again and again so you get it right. Oh no, your voice should go up here. Oh no, you should have a pause here. You get very, very particular about rehearsing and repeating, Shakespeare. How does that compare to memorizing and reciting particular phrases? Let's say in Japanese, let's say in Chinese. Oh no, no, you're getting the intonation wrong. You're getting the emphasis wrong. Repeat it again and again. Here's how to get across the mood. Oh no, you're saying that as if it's a question. Here's how to say it and sound like you're giving an answer, right? Language learning locks you into a kind of second childhood. But the sick and disturbing thing is, it is not turning you into the kind of adult you would actually want to be. It's not producing the kind of maturity, the kind of profundity, the kind of philosophical, political, or social character you would like to have. Instead, in a sickening sense, language education makes autists of us all.